They said I was the perfect addition to the Cross family, graceful, intelligent, trustworthy. At least, that's what I believed until a news alert shattered it all. My face was on every financial blog tied to a crypto laundering scheme I had never even heard of. The documents were flawless, my passport number, my signature, even fake voice recordings. And yet, I knew exactly who would benefit from my fall. She sat across the gala table that night, smiling like a queen who'd already won. The only thing she didn't know was that I still had weapons she couldn't imagine. The chandeliers at the Cross family gala always seemed to hover in midair, weightless and impossible, just like the world I thought I'd married into. Luke held my hand as we stepped into the main hall, his palm warm and steady, the perfect counter to the cold glitter of the evening. Helena was already there, dressed in a silver gown that caught the light like a blade. She greeted me with the kind of embrace cameras love, shoulders touching, smiles aligned, before guiding me toward the stage. "This year," she announced to the donors circling us, "we're launching a blockchain initiative to fight global financial fraud, and my brilliant sister-in-law will be part of it." It was the first time she'd called me that in public. I smiled, letting the words settle over me like a crown. In that moment, I believed her. Believed that my background in digital forensics, my years at the UN, my sleepless months building compliance tools for NGOs, all meant something here. Hours later, after speeches and auctions, Helena led me to a corner of the hall where the Cross family's Board of Honor stood, a towering display etched with names and achievements. And there, under Luke's, was mine, Vivian Cross, Director, Digital Integrity Initiative. My breath caught. The cameras flashed. This was my symbolic moment, proof that I had a place not just at Luke's side, but in the machinery of the family legacy. Then I saw her phone light up. The silver of her dress shimmered as she leaned slightly away, reading something on the screen. Her lips didn't move, but I could feel the shift in her expression, a fraction too much satisfaction for an ordinary message. The screen's glow reflected in her wine glass as she tapped a reply. A glimpse of text, inverted in the glass. "The files are ready." I didn't know what it meant, not then, but my chest tightened, as if my body knew before my mind could. The next morning, I was sitting in my office at home, combing through security reports from a client in Singapore, when an alert pinged my phone. A financial blog I occasionally read had published a developing story about a crypto laundering scheme routed through a series of offshore wallets. The article was light on details, except for one. They'd published screenshots of alleged transactions. The digital signature matched mine. My passport number was there in black and white. The timestamp suggested I'd initiated the transfers during a weekend gala in Paris, one I'd never attended. I read it 3 times, each pass colder than the last. Whoever had done this wasn't sloppy. The metadata was too perfect, the trail too plausible. It was the kind of framing only someone who understood the architecture of trust could pull off. By noon, the article had been picked up by 2 more outlets. Phrases like alleged involvement and possible misconduct slid between lines about my career, my marriage, my new role at Cross Capital. Luke came into the room, holding his phone like it was something diseased. "Viv, have you seen this?" "Yes," I said. My voice was steady, but inside, something had begun to fracture. "It's probably just some misunderstanding. We'll get ahead of it." He didn't meet my eyes when he said it. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe in the Cross family's fabled ability to crush rumors before they bloomed. But by late afternoon, an email arrived from the firm's outside counsel. It wasn't addressed to me. It was to Luke, copied to the family board. The subject line: urgent, protecting the IPO. The body was worse. In polite corporate language, it recommended that Mrs. Vivian Cross temporarily recuse herself from all board-related matters to avoid reputational risk. Reputational risk, that was the phrase. Not innocence, not truth, risk. Luke read it in silence, then set the phone down like it might explode. "It's just for now," he said, as if the words could soften the blow. I looked past him, toward the framed photo from the gala, my name gleaming on the board of honor. Just hours ago, it had been a promise. Now it felt like a warning. What I didn't know then, but the audience of my story will, is that Helena's phone had lit up with more than a single message that night. She'd been orchestrating this for months, planting the data, feeding it into places where it would look like an accidental leak. And every step, every calculated smile had been designed to bring me to this moment, isolated, accused, and one email away from being erased from the Cross family's future. The chandeliers had never looked so heavy. I told the board I would step aside to support the investigation, choosing my words carefully. It sounded compliant, almost deferential. Luke announced it to the press as a mutual decision, framing it as a sign of integrity. The optics worked. Publicly, I looked like a woman who understood the value of staying out of the way. Privately, I was mapping every possible route back into the fight. My first step was to vanish from their radar. I stopped attending meetings, declined interviews, and let my phone go unanswered. Helena's camp read it as retreat. That was the point. The weaker I looked, the less they would see me coming. Every night after Luke fell asleep, I slipped into my office and opened the back channels I hadn't used in years. Dark web forums, encrypted relay nodes, forensic tools no law-abiding citizen should technically have. I started with the screenshots from the articles, peeling them apart pixel by pixel. The metadata led me into a labyrinth of shell wallets and offshore accounts, each one folding into the next like Russian dolls. 3 nights in, I found it. A crypto wallet address embedded deep in the transaction logs, an address I recognized instantly. 2 years ago, Helena had used it to pay a boutique PR firm in Zurich. The records were supposed to be private, buried under layers of pseudonymity. Yet here it was, sitting like a fingerprint on the weapon she'd aimed at me. I leaned back, heart pounding. It wasn't enough for a public takedown, not yet, but it was a thread, and I knew how to pull it. To pull it properly, I needed capital, something fast, discreet, and undeniable. That's when I remembered the tokens. 3 years earlier, before the AI art boom went mainstream, I'd bought into a tiny collective of generative artists. It was part indulgence, part curiosity, a way to explore how algorithms could create beauty without bias. I'd all but forgotten about them until now. When I checked the market value, I nearly laughed. The collection had become a cult obsession, and my holdings were worth more than I'd ever imagined. I moved carefully, splitting the sales across multiple wallets to avoid triggering speculation. In less than 2 weeks, the transfers cleared, and nearly $50 million sat under my control. Helena would never see it coming. With that, I built the Digital Transparency Fund. Publicly, it was a philanthropic initiative to fight financial misinformation and cybercrime. Privately, it was a war chest staffed with people who had no allegiance to the Cross family and no fear of what they might uncover. Former intelligence analysts, blockchain auditors, investigative journalists, I handpicked them all. We worked in silence. The fund's first grant was a covert project to dissect every transaction in Helena's charitable blockchain initiative. She had dressed it up as a crusade against fraud, complete with keynote speeches and teary testimonials from beneficiaries. The deeper we dug, the more the facade crumbled. Buried inside the transaction chain was a series of smart contracts that rerouted donations through a series of anonymity mixers before depositing them into accounts tied to a cluster of shell companies in the Caymans. On paper, these companies didn't exist. In reality, they were linked to Helena's private investment fund. It was the perfect scheme, launder money under the guise of fighting the very crime you were committing. I stared at the evidence on my monitor, a growing collage of flowcharts and account screenshots. Every arrow pointed back to her. It wasn't circumstantial anymore. It was structural. For a moment, I just sat there, the hum of my computer filling the silence. Part of me wanted to feel triumphant. This was what I'd been working toward, proof. But another part of me understood the risk. Going public could implode the IPO, drag Luke down with her, and pull me into a legal war that might outlast my resolve. I closed the file, locking it behind layers of encryption. I wasn't ready to play my hand. Not yet. Timing was a weapon, too. That night, as I walked past the Board of Honor in the main hall, I caught my own name in the polished surface, distorted by the lighting. It looked like someone else's reflection, a woman preparing to burn down a house she'd once called home. The more I studied the data, the more it became a map of intent. I laid out every article, leak, and whisper against the cross-capital calendar. The alignment was surgical. The first crypto laundering leak had surfaced 3 days before the board meeting to vote on removing a director who opposed Helena's IPO strategy. That removal had passed by a single vote. My vote. The next wave of rumors had hit right before Helena announced a new tranche of philanthropic funding. Money I now knew was being laundered through her charity. It was like watching a magician's sleight of hand in slow motion. The scandal with my name on it was the distraction, the flare in the dark, while the real trick happened just out of sight. Mirror symbolism, I thought. Build a fake crime big enough to hide the real one inside it. I began to connect the dots backward, identifying the people who had benefited from each moment my reputation took a hit. A pattern emerged. One name kept reappearing, Richard Hale, a major shareholder who had once been an ally during my compliance work overseas. Richard had vouched for me when I first joined the family's financial committees. He had warned me about certain aggressive IPO tactics Helena favored. I'd trusted him. So when I found his signature on a capital infusion into Helena's blockchain project, it felt like the floor giving way. The date was damning. It came 2 weeks after the first false leak about me, and the funds were routed through one of the shell companies tied to her laundering network. He hadn't just switched sides, he'd bankrolled her scheme. I didn't have time to process the betrayal before Helena escalated. The new evidence dropped on a Monday morning, a grainy video of me accepting a black leather briefcase from an unidentified man in a hotel lobby. The man's face was blurred, but the money was not. The audio track, spliced with uncanny precision, had my voice saying, "It's all here. No one will trace it." I knew it was a deep fake before the clip ended, but knowing wasn't enough. By noon, it was everywhere. Financial news feeds, influencer commentary channels, even encrypted investor groups where rumors became market movement. Within 24 hours, 2 international partners froze our contracts, pending clarification. A third sent a legal notice pausing all shared ventures. The language was careful, but the message was not. I was radioactive. I called Luke as soon as I saw the third notice. He didn't answer. When he finally walked into the house that night, his expression was guarded, the way you look at a stranger who might not be safe. "We need to talk," he said. "I didn't take any money, Luke. You know that." "I want to believe you." His voice was low, and those words landed harder than any accusation. But it's not going away. The board is in chaos, the IPO's on the line, and my family is... He stopped, swallowed. "Viv, maybe it's time you step back completely. For us. For our marriage." The air between us was heavier than the chandeliers in the gala hall. "Step back," I repeated, "until it's resolved." We both knew what he meant. Vanish. Let the machine rewrite the story without me in it. Protect the family's trajectory, even if it meant sacrificing mine. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say that wouldn't shatter the last illusion we had left. That night, alone in my office, I looked at the board on my wall, the web of names, dates, and transactions. The long con was working. Helena had stripped me of allies, poisoned my public image, and now, with Luke's help, she was pushing me out entirely. I traced Richard Hale's name with my fingertip, then Helena's. The connections between them glowed in my mind like circuitry. Circuits could be shorted, Systems could be overloaded. The game wasn't over. Not yet. But I had to accept that this wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. This was about dismantling a structure designed to erase people like me and leave them with nothing. And if I didn't move soon, it would succeed. The flight to Geneva felt longer than it was. I spent most of it reviewing my slides, not for polish, but for impact. This wasn't just another conference appearance, it was an ambush in daylight. The International Cybersecurity Forum was the kind of stage where the wrong words could ignite lawsuits or topple empires. When I stepped onto the main stage, the air was thick with the hum of translation headsets and the faint scent of burnt coffee. My opening was calm, almost academic, a breakdown of AI-driven fraud and the dangers of metadata manipulation. Then I shifted. This next example, I said, clicking to a slide, involves a coordinated campaign to fabricate criminal evidence against a board member of a multinational investment firm. Gasps rippled through the audience as the screen filled with side-by-side comparisons. The forged crypto transactions, the deep-fake video, the fabricated voice samples. I zoomed into the data layers, pointing out the telltale patterns of GAN-generated imagery and synthetically altered signatures. And then, the kill shot. A traceroute diagram ending in a familiar logo. Every one of these forgeries was distributed through a network node registered to Cross Capital's Geneva office. I said, the access was not accidental. A second click brought up the chat log. The projection threw Helena's name in 10-foot-high letters across the wall. Helena Cross. Make sure the passport matches exactly. Change the metadata so there's no doubt it's her. I didn't look at the audience. I didn't have to. The silence was the kind that holds its breath before turning into a roar. By the time I stepped off the stage, my phone was a wall of missed calls and encrypted messages. A contact inside the Securities Commission confirmed what I already suspected. Helena had been summoned for an emergency hearing. But the summons wasn't a guillotine. It was an invitation to defend herself. She still had her seat, her power, her network. And people like Helena don't crumble under a single blow. I needed to keep hitting. The Digital Transparency Fund had been quietly buying distressed debt tied to Helena's private ventures for months. It was a move I'd set in motion before Geneva, back when I first suspected her cash flow wasn't as invincible as she projected. Now it was time to spring the trap. Through a series of shell buyers, I acquired controlling interest in a holding company that was one of her primary lenders. Within days, I called the debt. She could either pay in full or liquidate assets. The market smelled blood. Partners began calling in their own loans, unwilling to be the last in line. Helena's liquidity dried up faster than I'd anticipated. When the margin calls hit, she had only one choice: sell. I made the offer personally, meeting her in the private lounge of the Cross Capital Tower. She arrived looking like war dressed in silk, every inch of her polished, every glance a blade. "You," she said, sitting across from me, "have no idea what you've started." "I think I do," I replied, sliding the acquisition papers across the table. "Sign and the debt disappears. Refuse and you watch it all collapse in public." For the first time, I saw a crack in her armor. It wasn't fear, it was calculation. She signed. The sale triggered a cascade. Her resignation from the charitable blockchain initiative was spun as a strategic step back. But the insiders knew better. By the end of the week, 3 major partners had severed ties with Cross Capital entirely. The IPO was formally postponed, pending governance review. From the outside, it looked like victory. My name was quietly restored to the board registry. Invitations began arriving again. Former allies resurfaced, their voices warm with contrition. But inside, the hollowness was impossible to ignore. Luke barely spoke to me. The dinner table felt like a demilitarized zone, conversation reduced to logistics and weather. He hadn't forgiven me for going nuclear without warning him. I hadn't forgiven him for asking me to disappear when I needed him most. One night, I found him in the study, staring at the old family crest above the fireplace. "You got what you wanted," he said without turning. "No," I answered. "I got what I fought for. That's not the same." He didn't respond. The next morning, I walked past the Board of Honor in the main hall. My name was still there, newly polished, a testament to survival. But as I studied it, all I could think of was how much had been burned to keep it there. I dismantled Helena's power, stripped her of control, and restored my own position. But the cost was more than shares and headlines. The cost was the one thing I couldn't buy back, the certainty that the person beside me would choose me over the machine we were both part of, and I wasn't sure either of us would recover from that. For months after Geneva, my face was everywhere. Panels, interviews, magazine covers. The world wanted a champion for digital integrity, and I fit the profile. The Digital Transparency Fund became a symbol, a rallying point for governments and NGOs looking to fight AI-enabled fraud. But the spotlight is its own kind of prison. Every move I made was dissected, my travel itineraries speculated on by journalists, my social media followed by anonymous accounts that never posted but always watched. I began to notice the same faces in different airports, the same usernames circling my feeds. The pressure warped the edges of my judgment. I stopped answering messages from friends unless they could prove, absurdly, that they weren't feeding information to someone else. Luke and I drifted in silence, his presence in the house more like a shadow than a partner. Then, one evening, an envelope arrived at my private mailbox. No return address, just my name in precise black ink. Black. Inside was a single USB drive and a note. "You're looking at the wrong queen." On the drive was a dossier, surveillance photos, financial transfers, email headers. At the center of it all was Helena, but not as the architect. She was a courier, moving instructions and funds for someone else. The money trail didn't end with her accounts. It passed through them, on its way to an entity I knew all too well. 8 years earlier, I'd led an investigation into a series of suspicious government contracts involving emerging AI technology. The man behind those contracts, Sebastian Vale, had been forced to resign from his position as CEO of a military tech supplier. I'd assumed his career was over. I was wrong. Sebastian had reemerged quietly as the head of Ethereum Systems, a company that branded itself as a leader in ethical AI solutions, while privately developing tools capable of anonymizing massive illicit transactions. And now, the data on the drive made it clear. Helena had been his operative inside Cross Capital. My destruction had been a proxy war. It explained the sophistication of the attacks against me. The deepfake video, the perfectly fabricated documents, the coordinated leaks. This wasn't Helena's style. It was Sebastian's signature. The realization settled in like ice. I hadn't been Helena's target. I'd been Sebastian's, and she'd just been the most convenient weapon. I confronted Luke that night. "Did you know?" He didn't answer right away, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond me, as if the truth lived in a place he didn't want to visit. "Luke!" My voice sharpened. "I knew," he said finally, the words flat. I didn't know how deep it went, but I knew Sebastian was involved. He's a major stakeholder. If his investment pulled out, the IPO would collapse. I stepped back, my pulse thudding in my ears. "So you let me burn? You let me think your sister was the whole problem, while the man who orchestrated this walked free?" "It wasn't that simple," he said, but the way his shoulders sagged told me he didn't believe it himself. The betrayal was different from Helena's. It wasn't a strike from the shadows, but a slow suffocation. He had chosen the company over me, the IPO over the truth, and in doing so, he'd confirmed something I'd been resisting since the first forged document hit the web. In the world I'd married into, loyalty was negotiable. The next morning, I reopened the dossier. Every photo of Helena now looked like a pawn's move. Every wire transfer was a line drawn by someone who'd been playing this game longer than I'd been a piece on the board. Sebastian Vale wanted me gone because I had the tools to expose him again. The question was whether I had the will to face him now, knowing the cost the last battle had exacted. As I closed the file, I realized the answer didn't matter. This wasn't about will anymore. This was about survival. And for the first time since it began, I wasn't just fighting for my place in the Cross family. I was fighting to make sure Sebastian Vale never had another queen to move. The days after confronting Luke felt like standing on the edge of a glass cliff. Every step forward carried the risk of a shatter. But I didn't have time to dwell on what was broken. Sebastian Vale was still out there, and every day he stayed free was a day his network could erase another life. I began reaching out to people I'd met during my UN years, prosecutors in The Hague, cybersecurity task forces in Brussels, a special unit within Interpol dedicated to financial crimes. I shared the dossier along with the forensic reports my team had compiled over the past year. What I didn't share was how personal this had become. Within weeks, the investigation shifted gears. Evidence from my fund's analysts merged with international intelligence. The trail was undeniable. Sebastian's AI tools weren't just anonymizing illicit transactions. They were being used to reroute billions through defense contracts, political lobbying, and covert corporate takeovers. I testified remotely before a closed session of the International Court. The session lasted 8 hours. By the end, there was consensus. The charges would be filed and an arrest warrant prepared. Meanwhile, I was building something else. With a coalition of blockchain engineers and data ethics scholars, we drafted the framework for a new global standard, an immutable verification protocol for personal and transactional data. The idea was simple. If every data point carried a cryptographic signature linked to its legitimate origin, no AI-generated forgery could pass as real. We called it Atlas Seal. The night before the public announcement, I learned from a contact inside the European Securities Authority that Sebastian was planning to take Ethereum systems public on the London Stock Exchange. The IPO was scheduled for the following week. The next morning, as he stood on stage in London in front of a sea of investors, the alert went out. Cameras caught the moment 2 plainclothes officers approached him, the shift in his expression from triumph to disbelief. The warrant had been executed. His IPO died in the cradle. I watched the footage from my apartment in Geneva, the muted screen making it feel like a distant storm. There was no rush of satisfaction, no clean sense of victory, just the knowledge that the game had ended, at least for now. In the weeks that followed, Cross Capital sent multiple invitations for me to return, to reclaim my board seat, to help guide the company through its next chapter. I declined them all. I'd won my freedom from the machine. Stepping back inside would only reset the trap. Instead, I founded Dignity Tech Alliance, a coalition dedicated to protecting women from digital exploitation in the age of AI. Our mission wasn't just reactive, it was structural. We offered legal defense, forensic support, and lobbying for international regulations to protect identity integrity. Within a year, our reach spanned 5 continents. I rarely saw Luke. When I did, our conversations were polite, distant, stripped of the intimacy we once had. Whatever love had existed between us had been scorched down to embers, but I no longer looked to him for validation or permission. On the morning of my first TED Talk, I stood backstage as the host read my introduction. The theme was Truth in the Age of Machines. The stage lights spilled onto the curtain in front of me, a soft halo that felt more like interrogation than celebration. When I stepped out, I didn't open with statistics or warnings. I opened with an image, the first metadata-altered document Helena had ever touched. It appeared behind me on a towering screen, the altered dates circled in red. This, I told the audience, was the first move in a game designed to erase me. Every lie leaves a fingerprint, every manipulation leaves a mark, and the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always leaves a trail. I let the silence sit. The image behind me wasn't just a piece of evidence, it was a reminder. For them. For me. Because in the end, survival hadn't been about winning the game. It had been about rewriting its rules.